One of the most asked questions that I get on my YouTube channel, The Football Scout, is who I prefer, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of people still ask this question because to me, I would just assume that everyone kind of understands who the best player in this class is. But some people are still saying it's one guy versus the other, and it kind of surprises me. I'll be the first to tell you guys, I love Will Anderson. I think he's such a great prospect. He has so many things that he does right today that if a coach can just get a little bit more out of him, he can become a top 5 defensive end. But Jalen Carter has the potential to be one of the greatest players we've ever seen at that defensive tackle position. That is the upside that Jalen Carter has. And what's crazy is on tape, he flashes, right? He has great pass rush technique. He has great movement skills. He has great ability to just win, right? He has a good football IQ. He has good technique. Everything you want to see in a football player, Jalen Carter has. And for that reason, I think Jalen Carter is the best player in this class. Again, I love Will Anderson, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about why I think Jalen Carter is the better football player. I think one of the things you have to consider right away is the fact that, every year we get about 4 to 6 defensive ends that come into the league. They play 10 years. Every year we get that. Every year we get defensive ends, at least 2 to 3, that are going to get 10 or more sacks. It doesn't happen every year, right? But most years it happens. And some years we may even get guys, 5 or 6 guys that get 10 sacks over the course of their career, right? At least in one season. But every year we don't get a Jalen Carter. In fact, the last time we got anyone nearly as close as Jalen Carter may have been Quinnen Williams. And before that, I don't know if we had another guy since Aaron Donald, right? Even then, Aaron Donald he didn't have the same hype around him that Quinnen Williams had, that now Jalen Carter has. Jalen Carter, in my opinion, has the potential to be one of the greatest players we've ever seen at that position. And I know I shouldn't say that, right? You don't want to put that type of pressure on a guy. That too, a guy who I'm going to be the first to tell you guys, man, I wasn't even that high on last year. In fact, I loved Devontae Wyatt more last year than I loved Jalen Carter. But as the year started this year, I quickly saw in that first game that he dominated. I believe it was Oregon. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it was Oregon. He dominated. And Oregon has a good offensive line, right? They got a center and a right tackle that are both going to play in the NFL, both likely to be drafted in the top 4 to 5 rounds. And Jalen Carter crushed all those guys. And right away, I knew this guy's just special. Right away, we knew that Jalen Carter would arguably be the number 1 overall pick, and he literally may be that. Now, obviously, if the Texans got the number 1 overall pick, they would have went with the quarterback. But because the Bears have it, there's a good chance the Bears will end up keeping that number 1 overall pick and taking Jalen Carter. And here's the thing. It may make sense for them to trade back and add an additional first-round pick, right? Maybe you get 2 first-round picks from the team that picks 4 or the team that picks 7. But there's no guarantees you will get Jalen Carter if you trade back. So, yeah, although you get an additional first-round pick, I'm telling you guys right now, in about 4 years, Jalen Carter by himself will be worth 2 first-round picks. Like, that is the potential he has, right? And his tape does not lie, right? We've done film breakdowns on him. You guys can check the film out. It's on my second YouTube channel. His tape does not lie. Like, Jalen Carter is special. So for the Bears to trade right now and get 2 first-round picks for this pick, it may not pan out for them, right? Because they may end up getting Tyree Wilson, who may become a bust. And then for them to get the value of those 2 first-round picks, or to get Jalen Carter, you may have to give up 2 first-round picks, right? And I hope that makes sense. But in my opinion, I would not be mad at the Bears to just take Jalen Carter right now. Let's say, for example, the Panthers call and the Panthers say, hey, we'll give you numbered pick 9. We'll give you our first-round pick next year. And let's just say they throw in 2 more second-round picks over the next 2 to 3 years. I don't even know if that's 100% worth it, because with pick 9, especially in this draft, you're not going to get a sure thing. Like, I think there's about 7 guys in this class that are sure things, and you may not get one of those guys. And let's be honest, you don't need a quarterback, so you're probably out on that already anyways. But it's going to be very interesting what ends up happening with Carter. But I think there's a chance he's the number 1 overall pick. Now, what does Jalen Carter do well? And we're going to talk about Will Anderson in just a second. And this video by no means is me talking bad about Will Anderson because I think he's going to be a really good football player. But what is something that Jalen Carter does really, really well? If there was one thing that I would say he does really, really well, I would say it's his football IQ. People oftentimes throw around football IQ, right? But what does it actually mean? So to me, what football IQ means is, I'm going to draw up a scenario for you guys. Let's say Jalen Carter is lined up in the 2-eye technique, and let's say he has a guy that's backside blocking. So that guy has to cross his face to basically cut him off. Jalen Carter is the type of guy that understands that situation, and he understands that if this guy moves in a certain way to the inside, that I'm not going to let him cross me and I'm going to jump that gap, because it's likely that's where the play is going, right? That's processing, that's IQ, that's understanding what a guy's trying to do. He understands the movement of what guys are trying to do, but more than understanding what guys are trying to do, you can see a guy get his hands to the inside of Carter, and Carter understands how to break that contact. He'll know exactly what to do with his hands to break that leverage. You can get a guy who may down block on Carter, and Carter understands as long as he controls one guy, at a certain point within this play, the guy that's double teaming me, assuming I can hold my ground, and trust me, this guy can, that guy is going to get off of Carter. The double team will want at some point within the rep go up to the linebacker, right? That guy's going to climb. At that point, Carter understands if he controls a guy, he'll be able to shed him at the very end of the play and have the shot to potentially make a play, right? IQ, processing. I would say that is Jalen Carter's best ability, but that's not his only ability. In fact, he has elite pass rush technique. Now, his go-to move would probably be the chop with the swim move, right? Arm over, whatever you guys want to call it. Super simple move, but it's super effective, especially for a strong defensive tackle. Most D tackles in the NFL use a bull rush, a combination of a club move, and that doesn't oftentimes win the way it wins when you're in college, because in the NFL, every guy is strong. So every guy can anchor down against the bull rush. But it's the really, really good defensive tackles, defensive linemen, right? The top 5 to 7% of guys that understand how to use a bull rush to set up a chop arm over, or how to potentially spin. And Jalen Carter can do all of these things, right? Jalen Carter has great pass rush technique. And I think that's another thing that separates him from all the other defensive linemen in this class. You can argue that after maybe a guy like Will McDonald, who's probably the best in terms of his pass rush technique, you can probably make the argument Will Anderson's probably number 2. Like, you can make that argument. And for a guy who's a D tackle, that's insane, right? Because the truth is in most draft classes, right, you'll get about 3 to 5 guys that'll play 10 years at the defensive end spot. You'll get 1 to 2 guys that'll at least 2 or 3 times have at least 10 sacks. Every single draft class, right? Every single one of these classes, you're going to get guys at the DN spot. In fact, this year, you got guys like Nolan Smith, BJ Ojulari, Will McDonald, who are all potentially second-round picks that are going to have 10-year careers. In this year's class specifically, right? Don't think about any other class in the past. This year specifically, there's about 7 or 8 guys that are going to have 10-year careers. That's not the truth. That's not the truth for defensive tackles, generally speaking. Now, this class has a lot of good defensive tackles, but in the past year's classes, you don't have D tackles like Jalen Carter, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, right, the positional value perspective, when you look at it as defensive ends, yeah, it definitely has an impact for a team to win, to have a great defensive end. But you can say it's just as important to have a great D tackle. And the fact that it's very scarce to have a great defensive tackle, I think Jalen Carter has the higher value in this draft class. Now, value is one thing. I think Jalen Carter is just a better player. Obviously, the one thing with Georgia, if you're one of those guys that's going to say, well, Will Anderson had 34.5 sacks in his career and Carter had 6. If you're going to hold that against Carter, I would say, well, the knock against that is Jalen Carter didn't play as many snaps as Will Anderson, right? Anderson played a lot more. Anderson also played in a scheme that really favored him as opposed to the Georgia scheme, right? The Georgia scheme, one of the things they did with some of these defensive linemen, I don't agree with it, but I guess it helps these guys to win championships, which they obviously won 2 over the last 2 years, is they utilize these guys to cover multiple gaps. So they'll use a light box. They'll keep two safeties deep. They'll play the nickel package against the based offense. And they will expect their defensive linemen to cover multiple gaps. And that kind of slows down the pass rush a little bit. At the same time, Jalen Carter would line up in like the 5 technique, and that doesn't really favor him. Will Anderson, on the other hand, was in a favorable scheme, right? The Alabama scheme is very favorable for defensive players. So just looking at it from the schemes part of it alone, I think Will Anderson had the advantage there. But let's talk about Anderson a little bit. I don't want to end this video without talking about Will Anderson because he's a great football player in his own right. The thing that Will Anderson does, and I think Jalen Carter does this as well, but for Will Anderson, he obviously does it in a better way, and that is his movement skills. It is the physical traits that God creates you with, right? You don't get some of what Will Anderson does in other guys, right? 6'4", 235 pounds, that's great size. But the movement with that size is different, all right? Guys that are like 6'2" would move the way Will Anderson moves. This guy's very unique in his movement, and he's very strong. The guy will control any tackle. He'll take on a pulling guard. He'll absolutely crush any tight end. There's no tight end that can block this guy because he's too strong and he's too quick. Will Anderson has those physical traits that not a lot of guys have, right? It's kind of what made Trayvon Walker be the #1 overall pick last year. Now, Walker's traits are obviously better than Will Anderson, but Anderson, I think, is better in his pass rush technique, and I think that is the one thing he'll have to work on, right, is his pass rush technique. I think Will Anderson has to get better with his hand-to-hand combat. One of the things Jalen Carter does really, really well is he has those different moves, right? He'll spin, he'll chop, bring the arm over the top. I've seen him cross chop. Will Anderson doesn't have those same tools, at least not consistently. Like, he's definitely done it, just not consistent enough for me. So for those reasons, I think Jalen Carter is going to have I shouldn't say he's going to have the better career, although he is projected technically to have the better career. And if I was a betting man, I would say Jalen Carter is going to have the better career, but I wouldn't be surprised if Will Anderson has the better career, right? Like, these two guys are both supposed to be really, really, really good football players. Again, it's going to be very interesting to see how these guys kind of shape out. I do have film breakdowns on both of these guys on my second channel, The Football Scout. It's, again, going to be very interesting, right? They're the first two guys that'll be off the board. If it's up to me, I am taking Jalen Carter 100% of the time. I feel like just kind of needed to answer that question because a lot of people still aren't sure on who to take, right? Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.